She was only doing her job, serving tables, smiling politely, working hard to make it through the day. But in a single moment, her dignity was ripped away with one word, a word meant to humiliate her in front of everyone. What the powerful man at that table did not realize was that this insult would not just stain his reputation, it would cost him more than he ever imagined. How could a careless act of cruelty from a billionaire bring down an empire worth billions? This is not just a story about money. It is about respect, justice, and the price of arrogance. It was supposed to be just another shift. For her, the restaurant was more than a workplace. It was survival. Every tray carried across the floor, every polite smile, every thank you whispered through tired lips was part of the life she was trying to build. She was young, ambitious, and determined to prove that hard work could open doors, even when the world tried to close them. The customers barely noticed her, yet she noticed everything. Who tipped, who sneered, who looked at her like she did not belong. That night, the air inside the luxury restaurant felt different. The chandeliers sparkled, laughter echoed across velvet booths, and million-dollar deals were whispered between glasses of wine. She moved through it all with grace, though she knew she stood out. Her uniform was the same as the others, but her presence was not. For some, her very existence in that space was a reminder they could not ignore. At one table sat a man who believed power gave him the right to say anything. A billionaire, known for his ruthless business moves, surrounded by people who only ever told him yes. To him, a waitress was invisible. Until she wasn't. She approached with steady hands, balancing a tray, unaware that this simple moment would become the turning point of her life. The clash between her quiet resilience and his unchecked arrogance was about to spark something bigger than either of them imagined. What began as just another order on just another night was seconds away from exposing the truth about respect, dignity, and the cost of cruelty. The moment seemed small at first. She set the tray down carefully, the polished silverware clinking against fine china. She offered the same practiced smile she gave every customer. But instead of returning her courtesy, the billionaire's eyes narrowed. His voice cut through the air, sharp and dismissive, a single word that carried centuries of weight. Stupid. The word was not just spoken, it was thrown, like a weapon, meant to remind her of where he thought she belonged. The room shifted. Instantly. Conversations at nearby tables fell silent. Glasses paused mid-air. For a heartbeat, the restaurant froze between shock and discomfort. Some guests lowered their eyes, pretending not to hear. Others stared, waiting to see what she would do. And in that moment, the world pressed down on her shoulders. She felt the heat rise to her face, the sting behind her eyes, but she refused to break. She stood still, holding the tray against her chest like a shield. A storm raged inside her, anger, shame, disbelief, but she swallowed it. She knew the rules. She had been told all her life, smile, stay quiet, do not make a scene. Yet something about this insult felt different. It was not just an attack on her, it was a public declaration that her dignity was disposable. What no one in that restaurant realized was that someone else had been watching closely. One of the billionaire's business partners, seated just a few chairs away, saw the exchange. He saw the arrogance, the cruelty, and the mask slip from a man he once respected. And in his silence, the weight of $1 billion decision began to shift. But for her, the seconds dragged on endlessly. Should she apologize for something she did not do? Should she walk away and bury the humiliation deep inside, as she had done so many times before? Or should she stand, unmoving, and let her silence speak louder than his insult? The billionaire laughed as if nothing had happened, raising his glass and leaning back in his chair. To him, it was a moment already forgotten. To her, it was a wound that would not heal. To the room, it was proof of the power he thought he could wield without consequence. But consequences were already moving, unseen and unstoppable. Deals were being reconsidered, trust was quietly unraveling, and the empire he built on fear was starting to crack. All because of one word, spoken too loudly, in a place too public, to a woman too strong to be broken. The night was far from over, and neither of them could predict how much it would cost. The billionaire's words still hung in the air like smoke, poisoning everything around them. She tried to steady her breath, but the silence of the restaurant made every second feel heavier. Then, just as she turned to leave the table, his voice rose again, louder this time, mocking, daring everyone to laugh along. Some guests forced awkward smiles, others lowered their eyes, but she felt the ground shift beneath her feet. The humiliation was no longer private. It was public, raw, undeniable. Her hands trembled, though she held them tight at her sides. She wanted to scream, to fight back, to demand the respect that was hers by right. But she also knew the risk. One wrong move could mean her job, her income, her reputation, all gone in an instant. That was the cruelest part of racism. It cornered you into silence while daring you to resist. And then it happened. A chair scraped sharply against the polished floor. One of the billionaire's partners stood, his face hard, his eyes locked. Not on her, but on the man who had just destroyed the room's fragile balance. His voice was low, steady, but it carried across every table. "Enough," he said. Just one word, but it cracked the illusion of untouchable power. The billionaire scoffed, brushing it off, but the damage was already done. Phones were out. Guests were recording. The world beyond those walls was about to see what had really happened. She could feel her pulse in her throat as whispers turned into murmurs, murmurs into outrage. This was no longer just her humiliation, it was his downfall unfolding in real time. For the first time that night, she looked him in the eye, not with anger, not with fear, but with a quiet strength that told him his power had limits. He shifted, uncomfortably in his seat, as if he could feel the empire beneath him beginning to crack. The moment stretched, unbearable and electric. Would the room turn against her, or against him? Would justice finally break through, or would silence win again? The answer was coming, and it would cost him more than he ever dreamed. The night ended, but its echoes did not. The waitress carried the sting of that word with her long after the restaurant doors closed. Yet she also carried something else. Proof that silence could be broken without her saying a single word. She had stood tall when she was meant to bow, and in doing so, she forced the world to see what many tried to ignore. For the billionaire, the fallout was swift and merciless. By morning, the video had spread far beyond the restaurant. Headlines blazed with his name, his arrogance, his cruelty. Investors withdrew, partners cut ties, and in less than a week, he watched billions vanish, not because of a bad deal, but because of a single moment of unchecked hatred. The empire he thought untouchable crumbled, not at the hands of rivals, but because he could not see the worth of a woman he deemed beneath him. But the true weight of this story was not about money lost. It was about dignity reclaimed. For every person who had been dismissed, humiliated, or silenced because of the color of their skin, her quiet resistance became a symbol. She reminded the world that racism is not always shouted from podiums or written into laws. Sometimes it is whispered across dinner tables or hurled casually at those who serve. And each time it happens, it leaves scars far deeper than the offender will ever admit. Her life did not suddenly become easier. She still faced the same world, with the same battles waiting in the shadows. But she now knew that her strength had power, even when her voice was not heard. The humiliation he intended to break her instead exposed him for who he truly was. And so the question remains, how many more stories like this must unfold before change is more than a headline, more than a passing outrage? How many more people must carry wounds from words that should never have been spoken? Because this was never just about one billionaire or one waitress. This was about a truth that lingers in every corner of society. And the next time you hear a word meant to demean, the next time you see a moment meant to strip someone of their dignity, you will have a choice, to stay silent or to stand. Which will you choose?